Good day, everyone, and welcome to our latest Zoom-based webinar. My name is Professor Anne Karagosian, and it is my privilege as the director of the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA to welcome you to the first in our 2022 series of events commemorating the 107th anniversary of the start of the Armenian Genocide on April 24, 1915. Today, we are pleased to offer a lecture entitled The End of Armenian Sivas, the Extermination of Deportees, to be presented by Dr. Robert Sukiasyan, who is currently a Fulbright visiting scholar here at the Promise Armenian Institute at UCLA. Commentary and discussion on Dr. Sukiasyan's lecture will afterward be provided by Dr. Ruben Safrastyan of the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Armenian National Academy of Sciences. Having gotten to know Robert very well this year, we in the Promise Armenian Institute are very much looking forward to hearing about his fascinating research pertaining to a micro-level study of the 1915 Armenian genocide deportations that took place from the Sepastya or Sivas province in the Ottoman Empire. I am grateful to Professor Peter Cowie, holder of the UCLA Nadakatsi Chair in Armenian Studies, and one of Robert's UCLA-based mentors, for sharing with me in the coordination of today's event. I would also like to acknowledge co-sponsorship of this event by the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, the UCLA Richard Hovhannissian Endowed Chair in Modern Armenian History, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, or NASR, and the Ararat Eskidjan Museum. We thank all of our partners for their contributions to this event. Professor Cowie will provide formal introductions for our speakers in a moment, but let me note, for those of you watching live via the Zoom webinar platform, you have an opportunity to send questions to us by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom portion of your screen and typing in the question. Please be sure to be as specific and succinct as possible in your question, and we will direct as many of the questions as are practical to our speakers at the end of the lecture and discussion. Please also note that this event is being recorded for future viewing at our Promise Armenian Institute website and YouTube channel. And in the unlikely event that this Zoom webinar drops for any reason, please just connect right back to the same link, as it will put you back into our Zoom session. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn the event over to Professor Peter Cowie. As I mentioned earlier, Professor Cowie is the Nadakatsi Professor of Armenian Studies at UCLA and previously taught at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the University of Chicago, and at Columbia University. His research interests include medieval Armenian history, modern Armenian nationalism, and Armenian film and theater. Professor Cowie is the author of 5 books and the editor of 4 others, and is a regular contributor to Armenological journals. And as a professor in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA, Professor Cowie teaches numerous courses in modern Armenian language, Eastern Armenian, classical Armenian language, Kurdish, Armenian literature, and a host of other subjects. So Peter, I will now turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Robert Sukiasyan, who is currently a Fulbright visiting scholar at UCLA's Promise Armenian Institute this year. His research involves a micro-level study of the deportation process during the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 23, focusing on conditions in the province of Sebastia. Dr. Sukiasyan entered the field during his MA after completing his BA in art history, and was awarded his Ph.D. in genocide studies from Yerevan State University in 2019. Since then, he holds the position of researcher at the UNESCO Chair for the Prevention of Genocide and Other Atrocities at Yerevan State University and is a lecturer in the chair's MA program. His other research interests include oral history, cartography, and digital humanities. He has presented papers on his research results at scholarly conferences and is the author of several articles in peer-reviewed publications, such as the Journal of Genocide Studies, Hantes Amsorya, and the Herald of Social Sciences. This academic year, in addition to advancing his project of digitally mapping each deportation station en route from Sebastia and documenting the passage of each caravan, Dr. Sukiasyan has taken advantage of the opportunity to investigate a trove of archival materials on the genocide in a series of public and private collections. Most recently, he has been awarded a PAI postdoctoral fellowship for the academic year 2022 to 23, which will permit him to realize phase 2 of his research project. It is also a great pleasure for me to introduce today's discussant, Dr. Ruben Safrastyan, Professor of History and Turkish Studies at Yerevan State University and advisor to the director of the Institute of Oriental Studies in Yerevan. He is a full member of the Armenian National Academy of Sciences since 2014. Dr. Safrastyan served as an advisor to the Armenian Embassy in Germany and is the recipient of research fellowships in Germany, Hungary, and the USA. He has authored and edited 12 books and published over 100 articles in his areas of specialization, which include Ottoman and Turkish studies, genocide, and the broader Middle East. In addition, Safrastyan is the founding editor of the journals Turkish and Ottoman Studies and Contemporary Eurasia. He also edits the yearbook Peoples and Countries of the Near and Middle East. Safrastyan is also a member of the International Board of the World Security Network Foundation, New York, and a senior analyst at Wikistrat Inc. in Washington, D.C. From 2009, he has served as a member of the Public Council of Armenia and chairman of the Commission for Religion, Diaspora, and International Integration. Awarded a doctorate in historical science in 2009, he is the recipient of several distinguished accolades, including the Movses Khoronatsi Medal in 2008 and the Karakin Nujde Medal in 2010. We're very pleased to have you as discussant of Dr. Sukiasyan's presentation, which is entitled The End of Armenian Sivas, the Extermination of Deportees. Dr. Sukiasyan, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Dr. Karagözyan and Dr. Kawi, for your introductions and for hosting me so warmly and for providing me another opportunity to continue my research for another year. It is truly a great pleasure to be here. And I also want to thank Fulbright for providing me with this great opportunity. I would like to start my lecture. I'd like to start my lecture by quickly going over the structure of today's talk. First, I'm gonna be reviewing my sources of research with the main input, with the main focus on the Armenian documents. I will also discuss Ottoman documents and missionary archives. After that, I will quickly go over the main events preceding the Armenian, the deportations of Armenian genocide, which took place in Sivas, and then I will discuss how they were organized and have a closer look at one of the deportation stations on the route to the Syrian desert, named Kyotohan, where the so-called Security Commission has been designated to operate. I will start my first point on Armenian sources, because I want to evaluate Armenian sources, because Armenian sources are one of the sources which are able to provide a general overview of a deportation process in its entirety, from the day first to the last day. Since the deportation process is complex, the implementers, the gendarmes, are rapidly changing. There is no single perpetrator who knows the entire process in all its details. And also, ones who have planned and gave orders, they only can have assessments of results of events and not of a process. Also, they describe Armenian memoirs, Armenian survivors describe conditions of their deportation, their daily life during the deportation, food, deportation clothing, methods of survival, etc. They also cover any other aspects which are not covered by the official documents. Bureaucratically undocumentable matters, I can say. They also sometimes provide exceptional details about the crimes and their perpetrators, because the criminals are not going to report themselves. Since the time is limited, I will just only go quickly over some of selected Armenian memoirs. Earliest Armenian sources on documentation of Armenian genocide are coming from the year of 1915, and were starting to be produced during the genocide. One of the earliest authors is Karabet Gabigyan, who is a native of Sivas, one of the most important intellectuals of the province, scholar, scientist. He wrote two major works, one on Sivas dialect and the other one on Sivas flora, which is a singular phenomena in Armenian culture. Also, I will later talk about Aram Antonian, who again was one of the most central intellectuals of Ottoman Empire, a native of Polis, a writer, journalist, and a journalist. I will talk about him a little later. I will start discussing first Karabet Gabigyan's work called the Erenapadum, which in translation would mean the story of genocide, or the story of genocide. So he has produced several copies of it. Actually, the first copy which he prepared, didn't survive. It was made during the deportation, and he passed it to a friend to send it to a foreign ambassador, but the relative, the friend, was too afraid and burned the document. He started working on the second version, as you can see here on the left upper corner, when he reached Aleppo after the deportation. But he considered this piece lost, because he gave this to Aram Antonian for publication, but it was never published. So he started to carry out his task of recording the experience of Armenian deportees later in Jerusalem, where he moved with his wife and children. He started publishing a memoir. It's both. You can consider it both a memoir and a thorough research. And the most authoritative work on step-by-step deportation so far. All of authors which came after him heavily rely on Karabet's work. So from Jerusalem, he would write small segments and send them to Chicago to be published in Hanchag newspaper, Yeridasart Hayastan, for several years. But in 1924, Ironic Press in Boston finally published it in a book format, as you can see. Unfortunately, the book is not translated in full, but there is a partial translation, abbreviated translation available in English. Later, it was reproduced and also translated to Russian for the centennial of the on the occasion of centennial of the Armenian genocide. Aram Antonian was also deported to Çankırı and then was turned back, and then again was deported to Meskene. He somehow managed to survive and end up in Aleppo, living an underground life in Baron Hotel. Just like Karabet, he realized the importance of recording the Armenian experience, and they both cooperated with each other in Baron Hotel and secretly carried out many interviews with the survivors, and several folders from different regions of Ottoman Empire came together, and later Aram Antonian took all of the records with him, and now records are saved in Nubarian Library in Paris, held under the Aram Antonian collection. As you can see, here are some of those from the Sivas folder. Alike efforts were also carried out in Eastern Armenia, but since the time is limited, I will not go into much detail. But there is one important collection in Armenia which I want to elaborate on. It's probably the biggest archive on the Sivas in general when it comes to the Armenian sources. So after the genocide, deportees from regions, from the villages, the cities would gather up together and form compatriotic unions. And these unions would later publish memorial books or Hushamazyan. This is a special format of a book which aims to collect together all of the information about the homeland, the customs, language, religious life, political life, and doubtlessly all of them have genocide and deportation section. So for this effort, for the Sivas Hushamazyan book, there was an open call to the entire big Sebastati network, and people started to write down their memoirs or find the older memoirs in their homes and send them to the editor, to the author of the book. And almost more than 2,000 items ended up in this archive. Obviously, even though the Hushamazyan of Sivas is 2 volumes, around 2,000 pages, it could not possibly cover all of the information. So this is a huge bulk of information, mainly not utilized, just like the majority of Armenian sources, in my opinion. Of course, there are many other important collections in National Library itself, in the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute, in the archive of Institute of Ethnography and Archaeology in Matanadaran, and so on. Another important segment of Armenian sources is the Armenian Press, which was published on all continents of the world, in Middle East, Europe, Armenia, and especially USA. On these pages, you can find numerous memoirs and numerous explanation on any aspect of the genocide or the social and political life imaginable. So this is another huge segment holding Armenian memoirs. Just like I mentioned, there were compatriotic unions formed. And as you can see, this is the Sebastia volume I was talking about. There is one on Yevdokia or Tokat. There is one on Gurin, Tivrig, Sim Haji village, and many more, and many more, which doubtlessly have a deportation section. Of course, another big segment of his memoirs are memoirs published in monographic format. This format was also very popular. Earliest records start of being published right after the genocide, and they still continue to be published until now. Also, there was an effort both in Armenia and diaspora to publish collections of personal memoirs. As you can see, these are some of the examples of this, which include sometimes more than hundreds of records. So most notably, I have to mention Virginia Sebastian's work, but all of the others are as important. Since we're in Los Angeles, I would like to mention some of the Los Angeles publications. This one is actually a translation of a publication from Hayrenik Amsagir in 50s, translated and published in English in Los Angeles. And also, I'm thankful to the director of Arad Eskijan Museum, Miss Maggie Goshin, for providing me access with a newly published volume by Mardig Madunjan on Sivas deportations and other aspects of life in Sivas. Another big collection, which is again not fully utilized academically, or just barely has been circulated in academic circles, are the big collections of Armenian oral history. According to Girard Libaridzian's list, who did inquiries to the major Armenian institutions and scholars who work on Armenian topics, he could identify that there are 5,500 oral history records available worldwide. The biggest one of them being Richard Hovhannisyan's collection, which is accessible, which is gradually being published at USC Shoah Foundation's website, and I had the privilege to work on some of the records. And of course, there is a big collection of the Zorian Institute, of the Columbia University, and there are many more. Even though the missionaries and foreign diplomatic staff were not deported and cannot report about the deportation, the case of, and they can only describe the processes at their beginning when the deportees are still in the city or at the major cities on the route. But the case of Sebastia has one exception. There was an American missionary, Miss Mary Graham, who requested to be deported with the group of Armenians, but I will talk about it a little later also. And lastly, the last piece of this puzzle comes to fill in the Ottoman materials. And luckily, Dr. Taner Akçam has digitally published the big, vast archive of Father Grigoryans, who was one of the pioneers of Armenian genocide research and has vast archival collections deriving from different national archives and most importantly, including a huge amount of Ottoman materials, which was accessible to me through this website for my dissertation. And of course, if you want to read about different aspects of the Armenian genocide in Sivas and other aspects of life, there is some literature on that. Of course, Karabet Kabigyan's Padum, Haykazun Ghazaryan's Genocide Turk, Richard Ovanesyan's edited volume on Sevastia, and Raymond Kevorkian's chapter in the Armenian a complete history of the Armenian genocide. Since there is, so I will just quickly overview of the situation in Sivas before the genocide. So as you can see, it's a very vast territory, and it was the most densely populated province in all Ottoman Empire, and it also had the biggest Armenian population of any province in Ottoman Empire. There were around 205,000 Armenians living both in urban centers and in 240 villages. They had 200 churches, 20 monasteries, 200 schools, and almost 21,000 students enrolled in schools. Also, they had variety of social, cultural, and educational organizations, and a boasting political life, with two of the major Armenian political parties present in the region, Hanchagian predominantly, and of course also Dashnakhtun. As you can see, Armenians played a huge role had a huge economical presence in the region, and were dominating the markets of import and export. So, for example, out of 150 exporters of goods, 127 were Armenian. There were almost 7,000 tradesmen, and they owned the majority of factories, and the majority of factory workers were also Armenian. This is the territory of Sivas in late 19th century. All of these topics I'm about to discuss can be subjects of separate talks, but I want to just give a quick overview of the main events to provide context. This man in the picture is Muammar Bey, who was appointed as Sivas governor in 1913, who had many anti-Armenian policies. The first action he took in the office was the boycotting of Armenian goods. The entire process was led by himself and his agents through propaganda, and it was very successful. A year later, many Armenians reported arsons in their factories and markets in all major cities, which was a big economical devastation for the Armenians of Sivas. And just like for the whole population of the empire, Armenians as well were conscripted to the army from the ages 18 to 45 in August of 1914. This is important because this also explains why the resistance of genocide was not possible, could not be done on a larger scale. One of the main events which led to a radicalization, which shows the radicalization of government and anti-Armenian attitudes, is the murder of Vicar Saha Godabasyan, who was appointed to be the head of the prelacy in Sivas because the seat was empty. But unfortunately, by the order of Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa, or the so-called special organization, which is famous for its anti-Armenian actions, consisting of irregular pens with men freed from the prisons to carry out crimes against Armenians and other civilians. And this organization would report directly to CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, which was the ruling party of the Ottoman Empire and was the organizer of the Armenian genocide. So yeah, this is one of the early signs that so by the killing of Odabaşan, they tried to stop. They tried to give Armenians fewer chances for coming together. After that, the confiscation of goods and weapons took place. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, most importantly, from 1914 to 1916, the Armenian soldiers were disarmed and sent to work in labor battalions and later killed. After that follows the confiscation of goods and weapons, which is another factor restraining Armenians from survival. After that, right before the deportations in March and April, the Armenian elites were rounded up all over the empire, in the city of Sivas and in different other cities, and were brutally murdered. And it is followed by the mass imprisonment of 15,000 men empire-wide on false pretexts on having weapons or other false accusations. So when we see this picture, that there is not much thing to put against the deportation. So the deportation order comes in on July the 1st of 1915. And according to this order, the deportees were to leave for Jazira and Terzor. The journey must have been safe and under control. The deportation was explained because of war reasons. Attempts of resistance would have been suppressed by the military force, and the deportation was to be carried out district by district. This is done so the groups don't merge with each other and are more manageable. The police was notified about this process, and it was allowed to rent a chariot, a horse, or a donkey. For those who did not have vehicles, the government would provide ox cars to transport the property. This is what was announced, but in most of the cases, no transportation was provided, and actually many Armenian carts and travel animals were confiscated for war efforts. And also many Armenians were voluntarily donating all of their goods, including those to war efforts before these events came by. So the dissemination of this announcement the dissemination was through the leaders of the Armenian churches. The governor of Sivas called two leaders of two Armenian churches and passed them the order. Later on, it was distributed through the local governments, through town criers, and the announcement were put on the walls of main buildings of the cities and the villages. Because and all of the deportations were done district by district and on a very strict schedule. Even the doors of the deportees were marked by the dates of their departure, so not to confuse anything, and so they will be able to carry out this process smoothly. After when the deportation order came, the time given for preparations varied from place to place all over the province. It would start from 2 hours and last up to 3 days of time for preparation. So as you can see, there was not much time to properly prepare for the journey. And besides all of this, the bank accounts were seized, and since everybody wanted to sell their goods real quick, there was a big inflation for the same good, the same one item would be devaluated for multiple times. And when the time came, there were scheduled roundups of the entire population by force. All of the province was quickly emptied in probably less than a month or 1 month and a half. Only several tradesmen, doctors, and other necessary professionals were allowed to stay in the region with the condition of accepting Islam as their religion. Also, villages like Berganig and several others who were famous for their wheat were not deported until the harvest in autumn, and then were deported after the wheat and other agricultural goods were harvested. I want to go into details of events which took place in Kyotohan Station. Kyotohan was not the first station on the route of deportation to Syria, but was the major one. There were around 4 or 5 stops before reaching this station, and each of them had caused some kind of trouble to Armenians, either by looting or other types of violence. This station was located on the crossroads of 2 main deportation routes for Sebastian. One was coming straight from the city, starting from the city and following the old Sivas-Malatya road through Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa, Kangal, and Alajihan. This was the main route of deportations for the city of Sivas and its neighboring territories. The second route, which was passing through the province, was starting from Samson and through Merzivon, Tokat, and stretching to Shargishla, Kangal, Alajahan, and connecting to Kyotohan. I was able, a gang under the name of Security Commission was sent to Kyotohan to carry out the pre-planned actions. This gang took up a name for them and presented themselves as a Security Commission. The main but I will first present the members of this commission. So the leader of the gang or the so-called commission was Emir Pashaoglu Hamid Bey, who was a Chetabashi, meaning leader of irregular bandits. He was the personal bodyguard of Governor Muammar. And as you know, the bodyguards and the drivers are the most trusted people of politicians. So this mission had to be very important because he sent this person as the leader of this operation. He had some Circassian roots and was the leader of Uzun Yayla Adigera. He had also some governing experience from the village of Kamarig in Erzincan, and also participated in assassination of Vikar Saha Godabasyan. As you can see, all of these main events are for all of these main events, the same people were chosen, the very close, the most loyal and trustworthy people to the governor. And the next member was Bajanagzadeh Hamdi, who was the municipality president, and also his cousin Yoryuk Juli Ibrahim Oribo was present in the station and was the president of the commission. Halis Bey was another participant of the gang. He was the director of Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa, the special organization of Sivas. He was also a COP leader, a Çete squad officer. He participated in the massacre of 5,000 men who were imprisoned in Sivas, and he also shared the duty of Itihad's it was done under the supervision of Gani Bey, Itihad's responsible secretary, and also, like the previous ones, participated in the assassination of Sarg Odabasyan. Also, he's responsible for trafficking and selling young girls and women on mass scale. Tutunji Halil was the secretary of the Security Commission. And Kyutunoglu Hussein, again, was a Çete, a member of COP. He was responsible for the massacres in the Kızılırmak River Valley, and also took part in the false accusation of poisoning of Turkish soldiers, which investigation showed that there was no poisoning from Armenians against Turkish soldiers, which came out after the murder of Sag Vartapedodobasyan. But nonetheless, the accusation was quick to be spread out through the local Turkish press. And he, of course, was one of the killers, one of the plotters and killers of Sag Vartapedodobasyan and his cart driver, an Armenian from Zara. So the mission and targets of this station were mainly elimination of men by targeting businessmen, tradesmen, government officials, politicians, clergymen, and other community leaders and their families. And of course, also looting of all deportees all deportees without any discrimination by sex. So I will now present how the events took part as the deportees approached the station. So before approaching the site, on the deportation route, there would be appointed gendarmes who would guard and lead the groups of deportees. They were the ones who would decide where the group would stop, where they can go, or forbid them certain things, and make sure they're moving in a timely manner. Because, as I mentioned, they didn't want the deportation groups to merge with each other. That's why it had to be on a very strict schedule, and it is like that for all of the aspects of the deportation journey. And the deportees are also not being kept for long when they are passing through the deportation stations. So the looting started even before reaching the station. The gendarmes would kindly warn deportees about the upcoming station and its dangers and demand money for protection, which was not going to happen. So when the convoys reach the station, they are stopped and lists of all deportees are prepared before entering the station. Also, I forgot to mention all of the lists of deportees were prepared even before leaving their hometowns. Because they wanted to be sure that they know. One of the reasons is that they needed to know who had what amount of wealth, so they don't miss out, and also eliminate important social figures. These lists were passed to the members of this commission. So at the station, this commission presented itself as an official government body charged with safeguarding the personal belongings of deportees, as attacks by Kurds were to be expected along the road to Malatya. After this announcement, the usual procedure would be the detention of men. The officials inform that they have to hand over their valuables. Thereafter, so the men would be taken into the Khan, squeezed in, and ordered to bring the valuables. And after that, men would pass the order to their family, to the families without males and their own families. The commission claimed that the assets would be sent to Malatya or would be paid in monthly installments. Alternatively, payments would take the form of food handouts. Others claimed that assets would be recovered upon return from the deportation. So, as you can see, we can assume that the pretext of getting hold of the valuables was improvised. The general theme is shared by all of the versions, but the important thing is to quickly come up with something to motivate a quicker handout of goods. Of course, the deportees realized that this was not this wasn't their real mission, but there was not much choice. So they had to hand them out whatever they possessed. Of course, at the same time trying to hide whatever they can, because they're already several days on the road to Syria, and they found out, they know that bribery is one of a few methods of survival, and if you don't have any valuables, you have even lower chances to make it. After that, the officials warned that those who did not have valuables or would not want to hand over all their valuables would be killed on spot. After this phase comes the second phase, and this phase varies by the caravan. At first, when the most influential and wealthy caravans approached the station, there were several formalities kept intact. For example, the gendarmes would ask permission to touch their carts. They would need the agreement of deportees. But after that, as the genocide went far and far, it got more and more radical. And for example, one of the methods at the early stages of deportation, so when the first caravans were approaching Kyotohan, one gendarme would jump out the jump out from behind the building of the Khan. Khan is the inn. It's a medieval traveling motel spread out in Asia Minor. The gendarme would jump out and stage that he was just witnessing a Kurdish attack, and would make an impression on the deportees, so they will be motivated to quickly hand over as much as they can. But after that, things got more and more radical. Besides this commission, there were also around 30 Kurds affiliated with Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa, the special organization armed with axes and other weapons. And one of the last caravans which passed through the Kyotohan describes a scene where as the caravan was reaching the station, this Kurds would attack the group with fire, turn over the carts, and rape and steal. And also, during the later stages, one of the methods used by the commission is making fires during a hot day, so they get rid of stench of dead bodies nearby. So after the announcement is made and people are starting, after the announcement is made, 2 tables are set up in front of the Khan, and the commission co-opted some of the deportees to be a part of the commission. These formalities were most probably for escaping future persecution, because also they were officials and they were obliged to keep some kind of formalities, at least at the early stages of genocide, when the most educated and wealthy Armenians were passing through. So they tried to co-opt them in the commission. Deportees suspected of hiding valuables would be subjected to exemplary punishment. They would be beaten to death. They would be tied on a horse, and many other different exemplary punishments to motivate a quicker handover. Also, co-opted deportees were given some considerations. For example, if they didn't bring the expected amount of funds, they would be given an extra hour to go and try to reach the demanded sums of money. And after the money was handed over, there was yet another imprisonment of men and beatings. And after the second time, after another round of bribes came from the women of the other part of the group, which was not arrested, they will go directly into their next main objective and target and kill prominent men according to pre-arranged registers. They had lists from the city. The main targeted age of men was from 18 to 45. Depending on the group, men were killed either on site in front of other deportees or in other cases, especially during the early deportations, after they would just be detained and killed after the deportees were moved on. Of course, deportees were body searched, their carts were meticulously searched, the carts also were confiscated, since this was on the borderline, I don't know if I forgot to mention or not, but this station is on the borderline of Sivas and Mamure to Laziz or Kharber provinces. This means that the Sivas gendarmes had to return back to lead another group to this point, and they usually used this opportunity to take the last advantage of Sebastati deportees. After the loot was collected, it was categorized and placed in special baskets. There were baskets for precious metals, jewelry, documents, Bibles, Gospels, religious items like gold and silver crosses, and so on. And these were taken back to Sivas to the house of the head of gendarmerie. So, I would like to give you some examples and summary of atrocities that took place in Kyotohan Station. So, by estimates, by collecting together many testimonies, my estimation is that at least from 60 to 70 men were killed from each caravan. From 6 to 10 baskets of looted valuables from each caravan. And I will talk about several extraordinary atrocities. For example, the 8th caravan, which came out of Sivas city, 80 to 100 women were completely stripped off naked and were body searched. Priests of Saint Sakis Church, Father Iravapar and Father Yeprem, were stripped of clothes, brutally tortured and killed. Intellectuals and government workers, Harutyun Ansuryan and Pascal Efendi in his 70s, who worked in the telegram office for many years, were tortured and killed and accused of stealing the government funds. Also, a Hanchag leader, Harutyun Tuchugyan, was brutally tortured by Emir Pasha Oğlu Hamid Bey himself, but survived. The commission, and just like I mentioned, there was a special focus on tradesmen, clergymen, traders, and one of the examples of that is the case of Gezuren Skerikor, who was a shoe repairer, and the commission demanded 300 gold coins from him, which is a very big number. Also, Haji Garo, who was selling sharpening stones for knives for years, who collected money for many years, had to give up his 800 gold coins, which he took with himself for the journey. As I mentioned earlier, there was an American missionary who joined one of the caravans. This extraordinary missionary was Mary Louise Greffam, who is an American and was commissioned by the American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Missions, or better known by ABC FM, to serve in Sivas. In 1902, she became a principal of girls' school in Sivas, where she was the teacher of algebra and geometry. She also did tours, did travels, and has taught in the surrounding villages and towns of Sivas. At the beginning of the deportations, she had set up a meeting with the governor, trying to persuade him to spare her students, but was refused. She was a Protestant missionary, and it's an interesting fact to mention that the Protestant community of Sivas was not living in compact community, but was spread out throughout the city, and the Protestant population, Protestant Armenians, requested the governor to be deported together, and were permitted to do so because the government didn't mind to break down the groups by even one more district or one more group. She couldn't stop the school to be deported, but the governor allowed him to join her students and colleagues. I have one other. I have a survivor interview. I found a survivor interview from Tokat, who is the bigger route of deportation, not starting from Sivas, but the Samsun route. So she tells the story and describes the day when they reach the Kyotohan, and she finds it really surprising that they don't get the usual brutal treatment as they did on the route to Kyotohan. And later she mentions that she had found out the reason, and the reason was the presence of Mary Grefham in the approaching caravan to Kyotohan. So what they did is that they stopped this caravan 15 minutes away from Kyotohan before the Mary Grefham group would come close. And the leader of the commission, the leader of the safety commission, has sent people to invite this caravan from Tokat to spend their night in front of the Khan in safety. And what is the most extraordinary thing is that they were even given food, which is really exceptional story. And even more, there was looting attempted on this caravan while they were still at the Kyotohan, and when the Mudir, the head of a commission, found out about this event, he ordered his men to arrest the person and send him to Malaysia. And even after that, he didn't let the group go on because he was not sure if this person was still free, and so he wouldn't hurt the group anymore. So as you can see, the factor of Mary Grefham's presence is a really restraining factor, and it was realized by herself and by the group. That's why, and even after following in the following stations, her presence still restricts the most brutal treatment, but not as much as it did here. And after realizing that they don't want to have foreign eyes, they soon turned her back after reaching Malaysia. But she was very successful in communicating her story and reporting her story to the board, and soon it was published in nearest documents in Missionary Herald, just a couple of weeks after the events took place. Unfortunately, I cannot expand on all of the types of stations, but I will just quickly mention what happens next. So the next station is Hasançelebi, where people are treated much more brutally, and the main target is the entire male population, starting from 80 years old up until to 80 years old. The older ones would be left to die, and the younger ones would be spared to be abducted later on the road. So to give you an idea, this was the killing station of men, and the average from each caravan, the average amount of deaths from each caravan would be from 200 to 300 compared to 60, 70 of this type. So my hypothesis is, and I have several examples. I mean, for Sivas, it's not a hypothesis, but I have a hypothesis that it was the case empire-wide. So the type 1 of stations was this looting and eliminating of elites type of station. The second one was men, regardless of their social status. So I will quickly mention some of the similar deportation stations, the stations of the same type, which I was able to identify in the Sivas process. So there was another safety commission, and it actually shared the exact same name near the Zile village, which has registered the names of the deportees and their possessions and confiscated their valuables under a pretext of safeguarding and promised restitution upon the return. So it's the same narrative. And the same story repeats for Altın Yayla or Tonus and Tivrik. But in Tivrik, unlike the previous cases, this time the possessions of the deportees were promised to be returned to Arapkir. So this is the only difference. They even had the same returning destination of Malatya, even though these places are very far apart from each other. Let me go over my conclusions. So Armenian sources, so we can conclude that Armenian sources perfectly complement all of the other sources and provide the most comprehensive insight for the deportation process during the Armenian genocide. All of this information which was described, 95% of information is coming from the Armenian memoirs from different formats. Like, as I discussed earlier, it might be a press article or an oral history or a book or any other format. And when you put together all of this information like a puzzle and get the general framework, you can start, you can actually trace back the order. Actually, all of these survivor materials published on in different places of the planet in different times naturally cross-reference each other. Usually, they don't have all of the names, but from the descriptions of the events, one can understand what exactly is going on, which caravan they are in, what day it is, and where they are at the exact moment, even if they don't mention any topographical names or names of any criminals. And they actually cross-reference with the Ottoman sources and the foreign sources. So Armenian sources are important. An efficient deportation system was set up with the involvement of all levels of government, including CUP members, Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa members, local government authorities, and Kurdish irregulars and civilians. I have to also quickly mention that between these stations, especially near the borderlines of Sivas province, there were local Kurdish population who enjoyed impunity while carrying out atrocities against Armenians, and were coordinated, when their actions were coordinated with the gendarmes. Gendarmes would fire arm in the air as a sign for the start of attacks. So, as you can see, all of the levels of government are very involved, and we could even identify the presence of Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa here. So there is no doubt that the empire is directly in charge of everything. So the model of this security commission stations is also found at several other locations in the province, which proves the systematic nature of the process. Also, Kyotohan Deportation Station had the goal of eliminating any potential resistance by the killing of community leaders and looting the caravans, which substantially reduced the rates of survival. Kyotohan Deportation Station was the last hub for the deportation routes of Sivas, situated on the borderline of neighboring province. And one of its main goals was ensuring that the wealth of Sivas Armenians is substantially seized by most trusted figures and returned back to Sivas. Also, it's important to mention that it was not allowed to rob, to loot the deportees of all of their valuables, because there had to be something left for the gendarmes and for the station which were coming afterwards, so they would be motivated to carry on. But Sivas authorities didn't want to share the wealth of Sebastati Armenians with the authorities of other states. And as I mentioned, all of these valuables were returned to the city of Sivas. And finally, the presence of a foreign witness was a serious restraining factor to the atrocities realized both by the witness, who voluntarily joined the caravan to help her community, and by perpetrators. That's why they quickly sent her back. I want to quickly show my ongoing project, and I will summarize my talk. So currently I'm trying to, as Dr. Cowie mentioned, identify all of the deportation stations and experiences of all caravans, and its members, both survivors and the victims. So here is to give you an idea. For example, now we look at the 10th deportation caravan, which came from Sebaistia, consisting of 500 households. It's roughly 3,000 people. And as you can see, from this caravan, 70 men were killed, 12 saddlebags of gold were confiscated, and this person were killed here on July 8, 1915. These were just graduates of Armenian high school, and that was enough to be a target. And this is the next station, and I'm now trying to fill this database up as much as possible to have more data to analyze, and so these victims, who majority of which don't have a gravestone, could have a memorial. And I like to conclude my lecture by that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert, for a fascinating talk. I think we are ready now for Dr. Safrastyan. If you will unmute and show your video, we'll welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to attend Robert Sukiasyan's lecture. The lecture topic was interesting for me. In addition, I was interested to listen to Robert's lecture, especially to Robert's lecture, because Robert was my student. He took a course in the theoretical genocide studies with me. After that, I followed his scientific road, was familiar with his dissertation, and I gave him a recommendation. So it was interesting for me to compare the level of his scientific publications in Armenia and the scientific level of his lecture today. And I would like stress that I'm pleasantly surprised. Robert has made progress in a relatively short period. In particular, I was impressed by the structure of his lecture, the way he built up his lecture. In the lecture, he also demonstrated a good knowledge of sources, in particular Armenian primary sources and scientific literature. All this indicates that Robert makes good use of both the resources of the University of California in Los Angeles and the opportunity to be in this very exciting scientific environment. The scientific significance of Robert's lecture lies, in my opinion, primarily in the fact that it introduces a significant number of new Armenian primary sources in the scientific circulation. For a long time, Armenian sources were not considered important sources for the study of Armenian genocide. Preference was given to Turkish and foreign sources. Only recently, it has become clear how important they are for studying many features of the genocide process itself, especially at the micro-historical level. From this point of view, Robert has done a significant job. He revealed many details of the preparation of implementation of genocide process in the Sivas Vilayet based on Armenian sources. Robert's lecture also provides an opportunity to identify and reveal the names of criminals who were guilty of the massacres. Dear colleagues, Robert's lecture gives me the opportunity to dwell on a problem that at first glance is not related to today's lecture. I mean, preparation of publication of the Entente powers, France, Great Britain, and Russia joint declaration about the massacres of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, and personally accusing the members of Ottoman government for this crime, which took place on May 24th of 1915. The prehistory of this document is well known, but in my opinion, little attention has been paid to the fact that the document initiators were the representatives of Armenians, as it shows in Armenian primary sources. The Armenian elite cleared up enormity of massacre early in March of 1915. They began to inquire into the ways to save the civilian Armenian people. They came to the idea of diplomatic intervention, which intended to end the massacre. The concept which originated was a diplomatic démarche of powerful neutral countries, the United States and Italy. The author of this idea was one of the leaders of Teşkilât-ı Mahsusa, and he cooperated with Hatisyan, the mayor of Tiflis and deputy chairman of the Armenian National Bureau in Tiflis, who has great authority with the Russian administration in the Caucasus. And Hatisyan actively supported this idea. Hatisyan regularly accumulated the information about the massacre, which he turned over the Russian officials and the Catholicos of Armenians, George V. In response to the telegram sent by Varangian from Sofia, Hatisyan raised the question of diplomatic protest to the Russian governor in Caucasus. The official initiator became Georg the Catholicos, who surely had his own sources of information. On April 20, he applied to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Sazonov, for humanistic support. At the same time, the Catholicos submitted the similar proposition to French President Poincaré and British King George V. So the Armenians hoped to stop the massacre with diplomatic intervention. The example we have given shows the importance of studying Armenian sources for revealing important details of world diplomatic history. And we can say that the research of history in micro level is also important for the research of the world history, of the events, the important events of world history, in this case, in the world diplomatic history. I think Robert will have the opportunity to follow this way research in the future. Dear colleagues, I have a suggestion for Robert on a topic for his future research. I think the Armenian sources provide a good opportunity to try to identify more features of the genocidal process in relation of various groups of the Armenian population, both social groups and age groups. I think it would be very interesting identify the differences of the genocide process toward the women and girls, and compare with the murders of Armenian men. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that in the field of study of the Armenian genocide, we have a young, well-trained specialist. For this, I would like to thank, first of all, Professor Cowley, my good friend, and thanks to all the listeners of today's interesting lecture. Thanks also to all people who prepared today's wonderful scientific event. Thanks to all of my listeners today, to audience. Thanks my colleagues for preparing such good literacy, such good scientific lecture and such good event. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Safrastyan, for your thoughtful comments. I'm sure Robert appreciates those, as do we all. And now it is time for us to offer a few of the many questions that we've been receiving on both of the talks, Robert's, of course, in particular. Perhaps I'll start with a very quick question, and then I'll turn the questions to Professor Cowie, and we'll go back and forth. So, Robert, as you know, many of us with Sefastiyatsi forebears have been especially interested in your research, how it pertains to some of our backgrounds. And I'm wondering if your talk focused on what happened just before the start of the genocide in 1913. I'm wondering if any of your explorations actually go a bit before that, for example, to 1895 Hamidian massacre period, that relationship to Sivas and so forth. Or are you mainly focused on 1913 and beyond?
Thank you for your question, Dr. Karagözyan, and thank you, Dr. Safrastyan, for your kind comment. And I want to thank everybody for listening to the lecture. I was too anxious and I forgot. Thanks a lot. Dr. Karagözyan, actually, there are plenty of materials starting from 1880s, because there was a big cultural educational movement from that time, and many documents and texts have emerged. I have also a special interest in the Hamidian massacres in Sivas, and I have plenty of materials. I have materials on imprisonments, on life in prison under the Hamidian rule, and history of many cultural or social organizations. So there are plenty of materials, and especially the Archive of Compatriotic Union has materials starting from the medieval times. So Sebastati people were really well educated and produced a lot of texts, a lot of important and good texts, which contain a lot of information on every single aspect of social life.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to offer a question next?
Yes, by all means. So let me preface it by saying also how much I appreciated your presentation, Robert, especially the phenomenal degree of detail that you were able to enter into on all the different phases of the deportation process. So one of your slides mentioned particular characteristics of figures that were targeted for attack, and you mentioned Armenians who were involved in various governmental offices. In particular, you mentioned two that were involved in the telegraph office. I was wondering if you could give us greater details about the sort of position that these Armenians would have occupied in government service.
Actually, on Pascal Effendi, everything we know is just that he worked as the officer at the telegraph office, and not much is known about him. But there were also many other cases of Armenian officials in Sivas governments. For example, Vahan Chukazyan, who was one of the main figures of Sivas political life, he was one of the founders of Henchagi party, was a head of a village, the name of which I can't remember. But there were quite a few Armenians who held all kinds of government positions. And of course, there were many Armenians who worked for the government in technical jobs, not governing, but serving the municipality, like painters, drivers, and all of those professions. I don't think Armenians were ever appointed to any key positions in government. Maybe telegraph office is the most important of those, but that would be it.
Yes, I see. You also mentioned that a number of deportees were co-opted by the commission. I was wondering if you could give more details about what was expected of them in that role, and what sort of advantages they also received for that service.
Yes. So basically, the early deportees, the wealthy ones, and of course, all of these criminals were living in the city, and some of them even had close relationships with the deportees. And even there are cases of marital relations. So these people, and also the ones who voluntarily cooperated with the commission, were given extra time, or even were forgiven and were not demanded any money. So the personal connections, the interpersonal connections played a major role at this early part of deportation journey. But this is about only a fraction of the deportees and only on the beginning of deportation route. It gets worse as it goes southwards. These groups start to perish, and other groups come, and the groups from different regions merge, and then they perish and mix with other groups again, and end up in Syria, later in the region, and diaspora. So coming back to your question, I was carried away a little. So my main answer would be that personal connections played a major role in the treatment of deportees, and the wealth. The wealth actually had two sides. Some of the wealthy men were especially targeted, and there was special brutal treatment against them. But some of the caravans, like the caravan of it's called Maydege from the district of the Mother Church, the most wealthy Sivas Armenians could even bribe out and not enter the deportation stations. But after that, soon they would still be imprisoned and killed. But the status, the personal connections, and wealth could save a life for at least a little while.
Yes. One further question you have is that you make a bifurcation in terms of the deportations. So the regular one that you focused on primarily, and another one that was involved with men, all of whom were killed. You mentioned in the regular structure that on a regular basis, about 60, 70 men were killed in each caravan. I was curious, so roughly do you have the figures to indicate how many men would have begun and therefore survived, and why was this distinction made? In some cases, all men were targeted, in other cases, only one portion.
Again, it's the same answer, exactly the same answer I just gave to your last question. It's exactly the same expectation because of personal connections and that's it. And sometimes even marital connections. Some different members of a gang are sometimes connected, have an in-law relationship with the deportees, because one or two of the members of this commission were partly Armenian. I think the leader of the gang has Circassian roots, Turkish roots, and Armenian roots. And actually two or three of them were fluent in Armenian. So they had close relationship with Armenians in the city. This would play a major role in saving their lives, because as I understand, the main mission, the very central mission of the station is eliminating the elites who could put together a resistance. If this danger was not in place, it was not their main goal to eliminate men, because there was a especially designated station for that in a couple of miles. So, and also it's not this other station, Hasançelebi, also had the logistics of it. Here, there are no logistics. So in Hasançelebi, men would be tied up in small groups and would be pushed off the gorge, off the cliff. And actually, this was so repetitive and so much that at some point, the people would not die because they would fall on a very big pile of bodies. And also, there was this practice of, I don't know if I should be, oh yeah, I will not go into that much details because it might not be very, I don't know who's listening to us.
Very understandable.
Yeah, and by the way, I will be very happy to answer any questions from the audience from to my email, and also share any resources, literature or primary sources with everybody who's interested. So
this is excellent. Let me pass on to
I have a question, Professor Kawi. Professor
Yes?
Kawi, I have a question.
Yes, by all means, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My question is about Muammer Bey, the valley of Sivas province. In our days, Turkey is regarded as one of the progressive valleys during this last period of Ottoman Empire. And Armenian sources, how they're saying about the Muammer Bey. Is he regarded as a wali who can be good regarded for Armenians or not? And Armenian sources, I think, would be very important from the point of view to have a whole picture of his life, of his period of his time, as he was about 6 years the valley of Sivas province. And it is one more interesting detail that after the establishing of Turkish Republic, Muammer Bey was also continued his service as a wali of Mutasarrif of the Sivas province. He was regarded also by Kemalists as very good wali, example of wali. And I think it would be interesting know the opinion of Armenians of the time about this valley.
yeah, thank you for your question, Dr. Safrastyan. Actually, Armenians at the time describe him in the worst, in the darkest colors. They call him a snake, a lizard, and actually I had prepared, when I was going through the pictures for my slides, I have prepared one picture which I didn't end up putting in the lecture, but it's right on my hand. And if I could share my screen, 1 second, I will show you Armenians' opinion on Muammer. Can you see the picture?
Unfortunately, I can't see.
It's
Too small. Too
visible
small.
to us.
Yes, too small. You can send me by email.
Basically, they depicted Muammar's portrait, and in the background is a burning city and many skulls. This is how Armenians see Muammer.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I think according to my data, he was reported dead in 1919, but this might be a false report. I have to go back to my sources and check again, because there are sometimes these false reports of death, because I don't know, but I came by many of this. Might be that this one is also a false one. I couldn't.
He was exiled to Malta. He was exiled to Malta.
Ah, okay.
He was arrested by allies and exiled to Malta. And after that, he came to Turkey in times of Atatürk.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Perhaps I can pass on to a question from one of our viewers who indicates, my family comes from the village of Kotni in Sivas province. And the person asks, are there any sources describing what happened to the inhabitants of that village? The village of Kotni. Kotni.
Kotni.
Yes.
I have to look at my sources. I can't remember it from my memory, but please, can we communicate in some kind of way? I'm available at robertsukiasyan@gmail.com. This is the easiest one.
We will send you all questions, Robert, after the webinar, that the ones that we cannot get.
I will try to answer to the extent of my possibility.
Very good. Let me offer one of the questions that's in our Q&A list. So one member of our audience asks, notes that your list of growing radicalization suggests that there are phases of the Armenian genocide which include earlier aspects than the usual accounts of when it began, supposedly after the start of World War I. So you noted earlier, 1913 and before that, what do you feel are the implications of your research with respect to the start, with respect to Sivas or other communities?
I think my basic question is to answer how all of this was possible on the ground, because genocide is not an abstract thing, and these big numbers pile up one on each other, and it's surprising how in that short time of period the death rate was so high. Even if you compare with for example, with the Stalin's regime, which was like 100% concentrated regime, one-person rule with all secret services and progressive technology. If you compare like how the efficiency of the orders being implemented is not as high as I think the Young Turks regime was. So basically, I want to understand how this was possible and what led to it and how it was done. And as I mentioned, I think these survivors deserve to have a mention of some kind, because we usually refer to the genocide victims as a collective. But these were real people, and some of them don't have any physical mark left on Earth. For example, a kid was born, he or she was not registered, but I know the exact life story. The day when the kid was born, when he or she died, and so I think it also has a symbolic monument, the meaning of a symbolic monument. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And maybe before I turn this back to Peter, I'll ask one more question from the audience. Were there telegraph offices at these stations, such as Kyotohan? And if not, how was communication between the perpetrators carried out in the various stations?
Yeah, these were just little huts on the roads, which didn't have any infrastructure. These were usually medieval structures and without any type of infrastructure. But down south, in bigger areas, in more major deportation stations, there were telegraphic offices. But here, since this distance is not very far from the city, it could have been easily done. The communication shouldn't have been a big problem, especially with the gendarmes frequently going back and forth, and the valuables frequently sent to the city. So the communication, I think, was done by in person, without any type of technology. Maybe with letters or something like that, but not telegraph for sure. Telegraphs would come in Malatya and areas like that, and in North Syria.
Thank you. Peter, would you like to ask?
Yes, there are some more questions that have been coming in. One of these is, so it's two-parted. So the first question, did many Armenians in Sivas accept Islam? And if they did, were they spared?
The last part?
Were they spared if they accepted Islam?
So actually government itself needed some number of professionals for their own needs. Like doctors, several professional military men were kept. And as I said, the villagers were kept for the harvesting of wheat, but then sent to death. And there were a couple of cases of voluntarily accepting Islam. And also there was a big number of orphans who were kidnapped and forcibly Islamized. And Mary Gretham, the missionary I was mentioning a little earlier, came back from the journey and took over the Swiss orphanage to get Armenian kids back to Christianity. And she would gather them from harems or the villagers from nearby. And because of all of this, she was very loved by Sivas Armenians, and many Sivas Armenians call her mother of Sebastatis. So that says a lot. So they were spared and they stayed in the region. And actually, few people came back from Syria to Sivas. But soon after, majority of them left, either for an outside country or to Polis. There were not many people who stayed in Sivas area, I mean in the city of Sivas. I don't think there were many Armenians who stayed there. And if they stayed, they were probably Islamized and merged into the society and are not differentiated nowadays. That's information I have. I haven't specifically looked into the Sivas throughout 20th century. But there were several orphanages kept by the efforts of Armenian Patriarchate from Polis, and also from Near East Relief. And all of these documents are available, just in the same archive of a compatriotic union I was talking about. Not many adults stayed there, very few, and the majority of the population were orphans in the orphanage.
Yeah, the second part of the question is, what was the reaction of the Turkish population in Sivas when they saw these issues occurring with regard to the deportation of their Armenian neighbors? And the question goes on, so how many were sympathetic with those Armenian neighbors and what was happening to them?
Yeah, because of a gradual radicalization, the sympathy was not the most common feeling towards Armenians from other ethnicities, but actually not from Turks and not from Kurds, but American missionaries, local Greek population were very helpful. They would risk their lives to hide men, to hide kids, and to hide valuables. And they would go to far distances to be able to help out their Armenian neighbors. And of course, there were several, I'm familiar with several cases of sympathy from Turkish neighbors or colleagues. Those cases are also there. I wouldn't say they're substantial. They're few. I would say they are few, but undoubtedly it is a historical fact that there were also Turks who had sympathy for Armenians and were feeling bad for them and were trying to help them out the best they can. Sometimes they adopt an entire family. They take good care of them, and then they just let them go. There are also the cases where the relationship is not very. There might be cases of enslavement. There might be cases of sexual enslavement. There might be cases of enslavement for work. In the fields. So there are different cases, but yes, there are cases of very good Turkish neighbors that Armenians had in Sivas, in Zara, in all area.
Anne, would you like to raise some more questions?
Perhaps so. I think we may have time just for one more question, actually. We have so many, but we will forward them to you, Robert, and give you the email addresses for the folks asking. But one quick question, have you consulted in your research the Jesuits of Sivas archives? Are you familiar with those?
Not yet. I haven't been able to personally look into the archives. I've used several things which were published, but not personally. I haven't used any of them because of my focus is on the deportation, and the Jesuits were not deported, and that's why I didn't go there yet. But I'm hoping to, because archives are archives. Those are always interesting, and you never know what will come up.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you again so much, Dr. Robert Sukiasyan, Dr. Ruben Safrastyan. We are very grateful to you for your contributions to this fascinating webinar. And once again, for those of you who have posted questions that we did not get to, we will be sending these to Dr. Sukiasyan, and he will be able to be in touch with you. And his contact information is actually at our Promise Armenian Institute website. So once again, thank you to our speaker, Robert, to Ruben as a discussant, to Peter for helping to coordinate this with me. And special thanks, as always, to our amazing and energetic Promise Armenian Institute Deputy Director, Hasmik Baltasarian, who's been very active in all aspects of this webinar and so much of what we do in the Promise Armenian Institute. So now let me close our webinar by announcing a few upcoming Zoom or YouTube-based events that are hosted or co-sponsored by the UCLA Promise Armenian Institute coming up very soon during the rest of the month of April. On Wednesday, April 20, we have a concert in remembrance, Treasures of Armenian Music. This will be both live in person at the Hammer Museum as well as live streamed. This is put on by our UCLA Armenian Music Program led by Professor Movses Pohosyan. On Friday, April 22 at 10 a.m., we have a webinar on our Promise Armenian Institute website, A House in the Homeland, Armenian Pilgrimages to Places of Ancestral Memory. So this will be on Zoom. This will be a presentation by Professor Carol Bertram on her book that is appearing right now on this subject. Our discussant will be Dr. Melissa Bilal. On Monday, April 25 at 9 a.m. Pacific, jointly with the Promise Institute for Human Rights and the UCLA Law School, we will be presenting a webinar on the life of Eliza Benekmekcian, the Armenian genocide's impact on performing arts in Turkey. So this will be presented in cooperation with the Promise Institute for Human Rights. On Tuesday, April 26 at 10 a.m., we will have another Zoom webinar, this one jointly hosted with the UCLA cluster course on political violence, entitled Unearthing, Discovering, and Unlearning Armenian Indigeneity in Turkey, presented by Dr. Talin Susian and with a discussant, Dr. Ruken Cengel. And for information on these and many other upcoming events, please visit our UCLA Promise Armenian Institute website or visit us on social media to see more details on these events, how you can register for them, and so forth. So once again, thanks to all for your attendance at this event, to our speakers, to our questioners, and we look forward to having you all participate in future events.